St. Augustine wrote beautifully, "With love there's no task too difficult, no sacrifice too great for the beloved." With love there's no task too great, no sacrifice too difficult for the beloved. I think in our own experience of life we would say that that's true, that there's nothing that we will not do for someone who is dearly beloved to us. We see this at work when parents go out of their way to care for their children. Young parents getting woken up several times in the night by a crying baby who's having difficulties or sick, and they just want to be there to attend to that little child. Parents will get up early in the morning to take their kids to hockey practice or travel on the weekends to go to a swimming meet, a skating tournament. There's nothing that parents will not do out of the love that they have for their children. And the same is true for spouses. There's nothing that spouses will not do out of their love for their spouse, their beloved. We see parents who are willing to work 2 jobs to provide for the needs of their family. We see a spouse sitting by the bedside of their beloved while they're in the hospital overnight just to make sure that they're okay. We see that spouses will go with each other to chemotherapy treatments to make sure that they're okay and that they're not alone, and take them to various appointments, not counting the cost or counting the hours that this will entail. We've all seen so clearly in our lives that if it's somebody that we love, that we're willing to do anything for that person. So with this backdrop of our own experience in this life, we look at Jesus as we encounter him in the gospel today. A young man, a lawyer who is well-versed in the law, well-versed in the scriptures, he asked Jesus, of all the many commands that we've been given, what is the most important? What is the key commandment of all? In addition to the law of Moses that Moses had handed on, in the time of Jesus, or leading up to the time of Jesus, the Pharisees and scribes had devised a number of other oral tradition laws that add up to about 360 laws that guide the Jewish people in how to do their daily practice of living their lives in union with God. It was a very common question that people would ask of rabbis of Jesus' day. Of all these hundreds of laws that we're supposed to follow, which is really the most important, which is the foundation upon all the other ones rest? And so in responding to this lawyer, the scribe's question, Jesus first gives the answer based on our first reading today from the words of Moses. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. These words were very, very familiar to the Jewish people because the rigorous Jews would pray these prayers, these words, 5 times every day. And the Pharisees would have this verse of scripture written on a little parchment and in little phylacteries, as they called it, either connected to their forehead or their wrists. And they would often, during the course of the day, remind themselves, Hear, O Israel, Shema Israel, the Lord is God alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. So this young man, this scribe, was very familiar with this law, and he probably prayed it often in the course of his days. But then Jesus added something different, added something tacked on to that love for God with all of our hearts, souls, minds, and strength. Jesus said you are to love your neighbor even as you love yourself. This was a new addition to the way that they had perceived the law. And so all those hundreds of laws that the Jewish people had been following, Jesus said the 2 most important are one's love for God and one's love for one's neighbor. Our love for God should not take the place or supersede our love for others, but that it is because of our love for God that we express that love visibly to the very people that we meet, we bump up against every day. In saying these great commandments that Jesus gives us today, it calls us to look at our motivation. Oftentimes we do many things, many tasks that are very good in the course of our week, but oftentimes we're operating out of a sense of obligation or duty, or out of a sense of kind of checking out boxes on our to-do list. We have to ask ourselves, what is the motivation that I'm doing all these things for? Just simply to get things done and checked off my list? Am I truly being motivated by love in everything that I do? And even when we come to Mass on Sunday, we are to ask ourselves, why is it that I come to Mass on Sunday? Do I come out of a sense of fulfilling the law? Out of a sense of obligation that this is what the church demands of me, to go to church every Sunday morning? Is it out of a sense of fear that if I don't come to church every Sunday, that God will not welcome me into the heavenly kingdom after my life is over in this world? Or is it because when we were young, our father and mother said, to live under my roof, you have to go to church every Sunday. And that's why you've been going to church all these years, which is a good thing. But now we need to ask ourselves, what is my motivation? Am I doing this just out of a sense of fulfillment, of an expectation upon me? Or am I here really because I love God? I want to express that love to God in the flesh. Well, Jesus, he emphasizes to us that those two laws go hand in hand, the law for God and the love for our neighbor as well. And one great saint of the 13th century by the name of Catherine of Siena, she really gives us the reason why those two laws go hand in hand. In the book of the Dialogue, she shares with us some of the interpersonal conversations that she has had with her God. And one of these sharings of God with her speaks powerfully to this call to love. For she writes, as God spoke to her in her ecstatic prayer, God said to her, and he says to us today too, I ask you to love me with the same love with which I loved you. But for me you cannot fully do this, for I loved you without first being loved. This is why I have put you among your neighbors, so you can love them without any concern for thanks, and without looking for any profit for yourself. Whatever you do for them, I will consider done for me. So we will never ever be able to love God as God has loved us, because God has always loved us with an unconditional, merciful love. God always welcomes us. God always forgives us. God always takes us back when we've wandered far from him. And we cannot begin to love God as God has loved us always. But it's in our neighbors that we encounter every day. Those are the ones who let us down, disappoint us, disrespect us, get under our nerves, under our skin, under our nerves. These are the ones that we can really show God our love for him by the ways that we love them in the concrete, in the flesh. One contemporary saint really kind of gives us a sense of how to do this and to put this into a concrete form. Saint Therese of Lisieux from the early 20th century, she shared in her book called A Story of a Soul this particular incident in her life in her monastery at Carmel. Saint Therese writes, there was a nun in my community who seemed to be displeased and complained about everything I did. So I set about doing everything for this sister that I would have done for the person I loved the most. Each time I met her, I prayed to God for her, offering God all her virtues and merits. I felt that this was pleasing to Jesus, for there is no artist who does not like to receive praise for his works. So think about that wonderful testimony of St. Therese, that person that you work with at your workplace, or that neighbor that you've had a hard time getting along with. What if we love that person the very same way that we love our spouse, the way that we love our parents or children, with that same unconditional love? How different would make our interrelationships with them by loving them as we would love the person we love the most? Let's try to incorporate that into our days this week. And also, Jesus calls us that if we truly do love people, we'll be sensitive to their needs and want to reach out to them with help, to assist them, to lift them up for their needs. When I was a young boy, I often used to spend time with my grandma and grandpa, which we in Polish called babcia and dziadzia. And there would be evenings that I'd be sitting with them in their home and we'd be watching TV together. And my babcia and dziadzia, who had been married 49 years before my babcia died. And so they knew each other very well. And my babcia, my grandmother, would be sitting there watching TV. All of a sudden, she'd give a little shiver of her shoulders. Without saying a word, my dziadzia, my grandpa, would get up from where he is. He would go into the bedroom and bring out a sweater and just simply drape it over her shoulders. I thought, wow, he's so sensitive to her needs. He just sees a little shiver of her shoulders that without saying a word, without being asked, he just gets up from where he is, gets a sweater, and places it gently over her shoulders. That's the way that we are to be genuine lovers of others, that we are sensitive to the needs of others, and not just sense the needs, but then want to and actually do something to alleviate their difficulties, their sufferings. If we develop a genuine sense of love for others, we'll be looking out for how we can help them, how they are in need, and how we can make a difference to relieve that need in their lives. And so I invite you to spend some time today to look at your motivation. What is it that guides us on our journey from week to week? Is it simply out of checking off tasks, to-dos, doing the things that will fulfill requests that have been given to us? Or are we truly people of love who all of our actions, all of our deeds each week are done out of a motivation of love? As we're reflecting upon the motivation that leads us and guides us, let us always remember those words of Jesus. They will know you are my disciples by the way you love one another.